goal of toning this like this is that all the white of the canvas is gone, and the once I painted over that, all these, there will be little gaps and places where this underpainting will shine through, which will be particularly beautiful because we've got this very green and blue painting, right? So through that green and blue, there will shine these little, there'll be just little shapes and little passages where you can see this undertone through. And that has to do with color complements. So this undertone will complement the paint layers to come. And then the question is, well, then if you see a painting that looks like it's going to be mostly yellow, should you tone your canvas violet? And that would be just fine. Yes, you certainly could. The one thing that I would avoid in toning canvases is mixing any titanium white ever into the tone. I would just use a dark transparent color. So if you really wanted to tone your canvas violet, you could mix some alizarin and ultramarine, and then you'd have a violet canvas and you could paint a yellow painting over that and it would complement it. In my experience, this transparent oxide red, this nice earthy orange, is my catch-all tone. I almost always use it, and I almost never use anything else. It just it works beautifully every time, and so I don't really experiment too much with tone colors. I just tone it transparent oxide red, and then get going. So the next step is to do a master copy of the thumbnail onto the canvas. And I say master copy because at this point, I find for me, it's easy to spend the time working out the design. And then when I actually start painting, I get so sort of invested and excited by the painting process that I just sort of forget the design that I've already accomplished. And then I make all sorts of mistakes in the blocking, right? So the goal here of master copy is that the design that you come up with is better than the photograph. Like I want you to have that confidence in your thumbnail. And so you take this thumbnail without looking at the source and you do a master copy of the thumbnail onto your canvas. And this is where it's important to note that you want to be careful when you draw your little squares for your thumbnails, that they are as close to the same ratio as the panel that you're going to be working on as possible, right? So if you do a beautiful square and then you try to get that onto a rectangle, you're going to lose your design. That's an extreme example, but just be careful that when you draw your little rectangles for your picture planes, that they're the same approximate picture plane to the one that you're going to be using. Field. Right now, I'm using a Filbert Robert Simmons Signet 8. So nice size brush, not a small brush, but not a huge brush either. Still have a lot of control. I love these brushes. They hold their shape so well. You can put down a stroke and turn it on its side and just completely change the character of the stroke. So I really do love painting with bristle brushes, although I do have quite a few synthetics as well. But these bristle brushes do a great job. And so now, exactly what I just said, I'm not going to look at my source, I'm going to look at my thumbnail, and I'm going to do a copy of my thumbnail, or attempt to do a copy of my thumbnail, and I want to treat it with the respect and care, in theory, that if I were standing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art trying to do a master copy of Rembrandt, I would carefully observe the lines and the shapes, and I want to treat my thumbnail with the same care. And I want you to treat your thumbnails with the same care, because what you bring to the landscape, you're a composer. You're taking all of the beauty and it's like the sunlight through a magnifying glass. You're beaming it all together into one image that's going to represent what you see. And so definitely take care to do a master copy of your thumbnail. This is that main tree, which is just great. And then this comes over nice and high. Remember that the space between here and here can't be the same as the space between there and there. The barn is a detail. It's a tiny shape, and we won't worry about the barn yet. So it's somewhere in there, but no need to stress out about the tiny shapes yet. Have the trees coming over. And remember I said that I want to make sure that I straighten out this tree some so that it's not a repetition of this angle here over here. One painter that's wonderful to look at for the way he composes the landscape without shape or angle repetition is George Inness. Guy was just amazing at this. He'd take these really complex scenes with all these hills and villages, and trees, some of his earlier work, and work it out in such a way that there was always tension in his angles. There wasn't anything repetitive. So, George Inness. Just now blocking in, or not blocking in, but using this thinned out transparent oxide red to really establish where all these shapes are going to go. But I'm not worried particularly about value yet. I mean, obviously, a little bit, I want the darks to be the darks and the lights to stay light, but I'm not going to try to do a full value underpainting or anything like that. Just want to see where these big shapes are going to go for the design. And that's it. That's all I'll do for the underpainting. And already, I'm really happy with how this design looks. Really happy with how this composition is coming. So that is where you want to start, because now all I have to do is the rest of the painting, right? the design is resolved, and so now it's just a matter of putting those colors and values where they belong, and I'll have a resolved looking painting. So this is the end of those first two steps that I have on my processes 1 and 2, done the thumbnail, and now I've done the underpainting. There's mineral spirits in this mixture, and it's just straight transparent oxide red down here on the palette. And you can see how transparent it is mixed with a little bit of that mineral spirits. And now I'm just going to wipe off my palette and conclude the underpainting. Haven't squeezed out any of my titanium white yet, so I'll do that now. And the next step is going to be, with tube consistency, to paint this entire painting from corner to corner and edge to edge. I'm going to paint one layer one sort of even consistency of tube consistency paint over every part of this painting. I'm not going to leave anything uncovered for the beginning of tomorrow's demo. I want to block in the painting completely. And the term block-in gets thrown around a lot in painting. What a block-in is, it's the beginning stage of oil painting where you're using color and value. The way that I define block-in is that we want to have every part of the painting covered with um, accurate value and average color, but we won't be breaking down the big shapes very much for this first initial block-in. Now, accurate value is more self-explanatory. You just want the values to be close to the values you have in the source. Average color is you want to take your color shapes, and you can see these big, I'm going to show them to you. Let me share my screen with you so that we have a point of reference here. Let me make sure I'm not getting any phone calls. Okay, good. Okay, so I hope everybody was able to make it in. Let me switch to the source. And can everyone see that screen? The idea of average color, when you look at this shape of green, do you see all the variation in that shape of green, right? There are these little lighter parts, darker parts, browner parts, there's fresher greens and browner greens. Can you just call Susan back and see what's up? So you want to take this shape of green, and when I say average, you want to simplify it all into, for the block-in, one color of green. The color, and when I say average, the color that best represents the whole. So the idea that you want to stretch out that color as far as you can to cover as many things as you can with it. And the reason for that is if you start your painting going for all the nuance that you see in a scene, you're just going to get completely overwhelmed. It's much better to start with the simple and the big and work your way to the complex and the small. So when I'm starting this, I'm asking the question, which colors can I use to get, which colors can I use to get these shapes blocked in so that I'm not breaking into the nuance, but they're a color that represents the big shapes well. So that's what I mean by average color. And let me jump into painting that with you. But any questions before I do? Okay, so but the very first thing to do is find, before you start getting into color, is to find your lightest light and darkest dark. They will give you, the lightest light and darkest dark will give you the value scale for the rest of the painting. And so looking at the source one more time here, the lightest light is up here in the sky, right here. And the darkest dark I see is going to be right underneath this front tree, those two places. And that's what I would expect, because the sky is our lightest mass, the source of light, right? And then the trees are the darkest masses, and the shadows beneath them are going to be nice and dark. So it's not black, but it's pretty dark, close to black. And it's not white, but it's very bright. So the first task is going to be mixing the lightest light and darkest dark. And then that is going to give me my ceiling and my floor for all the values in this painting. It's going to give me the lightest light and the darkest dark. Nothing will be darker than the darkest dark. Nothing will be lighter than the lightest light. And that way, every subsequent value that I paint into this block-in and further into the painting is going to fall between those two. So right away, I'm going to have two things to compare to, two accurate things to compare to as I'm placing the rest of my values in this block-in. And one other reason why you would start with your lightest light and your darkest dark, there's an idea in painting that the easiest thing to see is the easiest thing to paint. And the easiest thing to paint is the thing that's the easiest thing to see. So it's difficult looking at all those greens in the middle range of values to determine how light or dark they are, especially when you don't have anything on your canvas to compare to. So, but you can find, this is the darkest. You can find the extreme of that range. This is the lightest. You can find the other extreme of that range, and then use those two to find every other value in between. So that's why you would start with your lightest light and your darkest dark. And let's get going. I'm still using my number 8 filbert here, nice rounded top. And to mix the darkest dark, I'm going to use a little bit of my Viridian. That's not going to do. There we go. A little bit of my Viridian. And I'm going to mix it with some transparent oxide red. And that's going to give me this not black, but very dark value. Let me smooth that out with my palette knife so that you can really see the value. And just for comparison, if you want the black from this palette that we're using, alizarin, ultramarine, and transparent earth red make something really, really black. And let me smooth that out as well so you can see. So you can see the value difference. Your darkest dark isn't necessarily going to be the darkest color you can mix. It's just of all the values, it's the darkest in the source that you're painting. So this is, now that I have my thumbnail transferred onto my panel, I become very dependent on my source for values and color. So once you have your thumbnail transferred onto your panel, that's when you really start looking at your source to try and determine what your colors and values are. And this gets a little bit more difficult if it's a bad photograph. This is the source that I've shared with you is a good source. You know, it looks accurate. But if you have something that's really blown out, incredibly blown out, or has been edited a lot to have a really extreme color range or something like that, it's a little bit more difficult to take that and turn it into something that looks like a painting, or a painting of something that's real. So here's my darkest dark. My lightest light is going to come right in here. So again, I don't want to use straight to white. I need to use a mixture. And one of my favorite things to add to white, to warm it up just a touch, is gold ochre. And add a little bit of gold ochre to that mixture. And I think this is going to do a really good job of representing that warm, glowing light that I see in the sky. So it's titanium white, which is my quick dry titanium white, mixed with a little bit of gold ochre. And I'm not going to paint the whole shape. I'm just going to put in a swatch. So now I have the top and the bottom of my value range. I have my darkest dark and I have my lightest light. And so another reason to have this is now I have something in my painting that I know, right? I know that this value is right, and I know that this value is right. And now for all of the questions and ambiguity in here, I'll be comparing all of the subsequent shapes of value and color to these two. When you have two things that are right, it's much easier to find the third. And then you have three that are right and much easier to find the fourth. When you get towards the end of the painting, any error in value jumps out very, very quickly because you have so much correct. And in the context of all that accuracy, any error glares and shows itself very quickly. So now we're at the beginning of the block in, lightest light, darkest dark. And this is the part where we're looking for average color and accurate value. Accurate value because once I get to the end of this painting, there will be layers in the block in, this first pass of painting here, that I would love to have show through to the very end. For instance, this was I'm going to pull it down. This was the source from last week, or not the source, based on the source. And the mountain back here, blocked in, didn't really get altered at all after the block in. And the reason it was able to stay as that simply stated shape in the distance back there is because it was accurate value. If I painted it too light, then I would have had to have gone back over it and fixed the value at some point. So by having accurate value from the beginning, you can have these nice, big, simple shapes of color stay to the end of the painting in some cases, and then all the texture gets piled on top of other shapes, and you have this nice contrast between that thin, smooth paint and the thicker, bumpier paint of subsequent layers. So that's the reason, one of the reasons for accurate value from the beginning. Also makes everything else easier to see throughout. All right, now the big question. Okay, so accurate value, average color, I get it. But where do you start, right? Now that you've started, where do you start? And this is the part for me that is, it used to be paralyzing, right? Like, and I just like, so where do I start? You feel sort of like you're on a plateau trying to find a way down, right? Or find a way up, as the case may be. So the question that I ask is, what does the painting need next? When I'm alone in my studio painting, I ask the question, what does the painting need next? When I'm painting a demo, I ask the question, what does the painting need next? Always, what does the painting need next? But that can be kind of a hard question to answer too. It's a good question, but well, I don't know. It needs everything next, right? So the question to ask and answer that will get you to the next step, that'll get the painting moving, is what is the easiest thing to see, right? What's the easiest thing to see? What's the shape, color, and value that I'm pretty sure I can get really close from the very beginning and paint the easiest thing to see? And so and that's going to be different for each person, right? But the easiest thing for me to see, I think, is this shape of this tree right here. It's a green that's a recognizable green. It's not a vague color particularly. It's right on top of this darkest dark, so it'll be fairly easy for me to judge the value. And also, once I have it, it'll be easier to judge what's happening back here and what's happening in the fields around. What's the easiest thing to see? One other note to make before I start this, I'm not concerned at all in my process with starting with the background and then going to the things in the front. I just start, I think of them as shapes like the mosaic. You just put one shape next to another shape until you have an image. Not really thinking of the sky behind the mountain or the sky behind the hill and the hill behind the tree and the grass in front of the tree yet. I'll resolve all of that when I get to rendering edges, probably tomorrow. Really just concerned with shapes at this point, which again, the way that I process information, it's so much easier if you can just worry about one or two things at a time. If you worry about the whole from the beginning, it just leads to burnout, I think. So I'm going to paint this shape in first, and I'm going to use tube consistency paint. What colors mixed together would get something close to that? So I typically start with, when I'm trying to mix a color, I pick the thing on the palette that's closest to the color that I'm seeing, right? And so Viridian, right? And now, of course, if I put Viridian up there, it's the wrong color and the wrong value. Can't use just Viridian, has to be modified. So I think it needs some gold ochre. And gold ochre alone, and it's still too dark. It's not the correct value. Remember, I'm comparing it to the darkest dark that I have down here. So let me just put a swatch next to it. You see that they're almost the same. Where in the source, there's quite a jump up in value for this mass of this tree compared to the darkest dark. So that's where having that established value saves me. If I were to just start with that tree color without having my darkest dark established, I think I would be in trouble. So I'm going to add a little bit of this bismuth yellow. Now, bismuth, if you weren't able to get it or you don't want to get it, that's fine. Lemon yellow, cadmium yellow pale, Hansa yellow light, all of those different bright yellows will do just fine in the stead of bismuth. So I'm adding bismuth, and it's making the value much, much more correct, right? So now I have a correct value, but looking at my palette all together, I think it's quite clear that it's too green, right? If I put that green in there, I'll be in trouble right away. So this is where I think of the color wheel. Do you remember that red is the complement of green? Red is the complement of green. So one of these reds, either would be fine. If I add that to my green mixture, it's going to gray it down. So I'm just going to add a little bit, a tiny, tiny bit of my alizarin and a little bit of titanium white to balance out that alizarin, which would make the mixture darker. And can you see how that just neutralizes it right away into a green that's less green? That's the power of mixing complementary colors together. Just a little gold ochre back in there to make sure it's not too cool. And let's do a swatch and see how it looks. Getting pretty close. I think that it could be a little bit fresher green. So I'm just going to go back to my palette and just mix a tiny bit more Viridian and a tiny bit more bismuth together into this mixture just to bring that green back a little bit. I added essentially a little too much red. There. Now, the application of the paint. I'm not using any thinner, and I'm not using any medium. This is tube consistency, just as the paint is squeezed out of the tube. And I'm also not really that worried about texture at all at this stage of this painting. I'm just wanting to establish these flat shapes of color. So these are just, modest little brush strokes to establish the shape and get the painting going. Lots of texture to come. Lots of paint buildup to come, but it all starts with this first layer, the block-in. And also lots of color nuance to come. Lots of beautiful things, but have to start with the first shape. I'm going to mix a little more ochre into one corner of that same mixture and just need it to be a little bit warmer. Worried that I'll have it too blue-green at the beginning. There, that's better. Okay, so there's the first shape. And everything just got easier. There's the first shape in comparison to the darkest dark. And now you're asking the question, what's the next easiest thing to see? What's the next easiest thing to paint? Or what does the painting need next? And for me, this is where I would go straight into the hill because now I have this shape. It's much easier to judge what's happening back here. Now, I know that it needs to be less yellow than the green in front of it, just to have the atmospheric perspective that we need, and it could possibly be a little lighter. So I'm just adding some white to it. And that's going to make it a little bit cooler and a little bit lighter. They really do run together quite a bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin to that too. Great questions today so far too. I really appreciate any input that you have, any questions that you have. If you have the question, at least 10 other people do too. So always feel free to ask. Okay, and this is where that lead-in is going to be. And so average color, right? I couldn't use this color here to paint that shadow, that cloud shadow on the back of the hill going away, right? That's where it would not have been a good representation of what's on the, up above. So that's a second shape of color that needs to come in. And let me point you at my palette for a second. And the color here is close to what I need for up there. It just needs to be bluer. So when I'm mixing color, I don't very often clean off my palette. I like to mix out of one sort of puddle of paint that's the common ancestor of most of the other puddles of paint on my palette throughout a painting. So this green, rather than scraping it off and mixing a new green, I'm trying to mix something cooler. So I'm just going to add some cobalt into the corner and mix it right into what I have. And this is a way for me to achieve harmony in my paintings. I like the way it looks when all the color mixtures are related to each other. They've all sort of, they're all from the same family tree. So that's why I don't clean off my palette very often. But the way that I avoid getting muddy looking mixtures is by always mixing fresh color in with whatever new paint I'm mixing. So I like the analogy of a pond that has a river flowing into one end of it is going to be a nice, fresh, clean water, essentially, place to swim, place to walk. A pond in the summertime that has no inlet and no outlet will just, it's stagnant and slimy and not a place to swim. So that's how I like to think of it. The way you keep this puddle, this pond of color fresh and usable is by always mixing in clean paint from the outside edge. So just putting this one down, really analyzing it compared to what I have already. I think that's looking pretty good. It also helps to mix on the palette in context with the paints that you already have on your panel. So it's a little easier to judge these two together on my palette and then to be more sure when I put them up here. So, but even with that though, I think it's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to add just a dab, like a little teeny touch of white on one end here and see where that gets me. Some of the undertone mixes through, and that's okay. This is the first skin of paint. So now what does the painting need next? What's the easiest thing to see? I am going to just paint this hill, these big shapes of this hill in next. And because I've been painting tree masses all along. Now I'm going to be painting not a horizontal mass, but an angled mass on this. And so it's going to be much lighter. Looking back at the palette with you all here, I'm going to add some gold ochre right into the mixture that I've been using. Again, I like to sort of just keep working the same puddle and making it do what needs to be done by just adding more color to it, rather than scraping off my palette and adding new paint. So let's use this, and of course adding gold ochre and bismuth to get it moving towards the correct value. It's way too yellow, right? So I'm just going to add a little ultramarine to it, and then a touch of the alizarin. And you can see now why ultramarine and alizarin, why those two paints together. The reason is because if you mix alizarin and ultramarine together, you get a violet, right? Ultramarine and alizarin mixed together give you a violet. So if you add both alizarin and ultramarine to something that's too yellow, as I've done over there, that's going to gray down that yellow. Again, the color wheel idea, whatever is across from a color on the color wheel will make it less, will gray it down. If you add violet to yellow, or you're trying to make something look less yellow, adding violet to it grays it right down, for sure. Get it back to where it needs to be. Adding a little bit more Viridian into that just to keep it green. It's getting a little bit too brown. All right. So switching back to the number 8, going to see how this looks. And if it doesn't look right, I can just remix it. Put it in. I think that the value is too close. I think that this value is not light enough compared to the values that I have here already. So the thing to do is to mix some white into it. Now with titanium white, it does lighten things quickly and easily, but it also cools them off a little bit, like toothpaste stains, right? They get kind of just gray, white, chalky. So you always have to balance off your adding of, or typically have to balance off your adding of titanium by adding the bright yellow or the bright red or something to the mixture along with the titanium, so that it doesn't get too toothpastey, minty green sort of color. And that's getting closer, but I think that it could be even lighter still. So I'm just going to add a little bit more white and a little bit more lemon. Holbein's Quick Dry White is the quickest drying white I've ever worked with. I just love it. It's like, it has revolutionized my painting style. I can't say enough good things about it, because these paints will set up completely very quickly, and I can just do another layer right over the top of them, rather than, if you use a regular linseed oil titanium, it takes, a week to dry, especially if it's thick. So I love quick dry. The drawback is that it stinks. If you're using it this morning, you know that it just stinks. They have to put quite a bit of solvent in with the alkyd to make it a workable consistency. So it just doesn't smell good. So that's the only drawback to quick dry. So I am mixing the shadow color, and I accidentally pulled a little of this dark, which was a mixture of these three together, but I'm not going to mix it like that for you. So let me just remix that shadow color. This is the color of the field, and I'm looking for the color of the shadows of the trees coming across the bottom of the field that are going to be right here. So I'm just going to take a little cobalt and mix it into the corner. And it'll be a little too beautiful a green. See that? And so into that beautiful green, I must mix a tiny bit of red so that it's not quite as green. So just sort of set it back a little bit, a little less chromatic, just a touch of red. And let's see how they look. That might be, especially in the source, a little too, because it's this very fuzzy spotlight of sunlight here. It's not a clear day beam of light. It's filtered by clouds, and so these shadows are not quite as distinct. They're a little bit more diffuse. So this is too much contrast. So easy fix, just a little bit of titanium and make that a little bit lighter and a little bit grayer. And in we go. It's a subtle change, but an even more. Here we go. So one thing about the way that I recommend painting is when I make a mistake, as you've seen me do, I've lost count, like I'm constantly making mistakes. I just cover them up. Oil painting is really, really forgiving. In fact, fixing little mistakes on oil paintings actually has the effect of making the painting a bit more interesting in some cases. So by layering color on color and value on value to make sure that you're adjusting things so that they're correct, it actually gives you a buildup of variety in a painting that makes it interesting. So there's the hillside with the warm light and the cool shadow, and I'm getting really excited about how this is looking. I think we need one stroke of red here so that I know where the barn's going to go, but I'm not going to worry about rendering it today. Probably won't do too much with it until Wednesday. I'm just going to take some of my Pyrrole red, and if you don't have Pyrrole, Cad Red of, Cad Red Light, Cad Red Medium, Cad Red Deep, those will all work. Naphthol Scarlet will work well, and then there are just loads and loads of other reds, I know. So just get a really strong, bright red, and it'll do the trick. I like the Pyrrole red just because it's so strong in its tinting color. But what I've done is I've just mixed the red in with the edge of the green, which graded out quite a bit. And I just added a little bit of gold ochre to it to make it that warmer sort of orange color, and a tiny bit of white so it won't be too dark. And this is my number 12 brush, and I'm just going to put in one placeholder stroke. Not going to get into, all right, 2 placeholder strokes. Promise, 3's it. Okay, done. So this is just to hold that spot for the barn. And actually, I think I just need to bring it down a tiny bit. I've gone up a little high with it. So there. And then there are fields beyond it that are going to be a little less green than these fields in front of it, right? Because it grows back and grays in perspective. So I've just mixed the shadow and the light together that I used to render the field in front, and that's going to give me a grayer version of that color. This is just the number 2 brush, and it's a number true filbert. And I'm just going across this shape back here, cutting back into where that barn's going to go a little bit. And get the distance in there. And again, you can see the sort of mosaic application here. I'm just bringing the shapes so that they touch each other without worrying too much about edges yet. A little bit, but not too much. Now, when I say a little bit, I mean that this edge is softer than this edge is, because in the source, this edge is softer than that edge is. But I'm not putting my full attention on the edges of these shapes just yet. Now I want to mix this green, and I'm looking at the source, and it's green grass in shadow coming toward us, so it's much greener than the greens beyond it. Beautiful green. Viridian and bismuth yellow into the gray-green mixtures that I have already. So it's not, you know, if I were to mix viridian and bismuth together in their own separate pile, I would get something more like that, which won't do, right? That's too, it's a little too electric. Sometimes you get greens like that when you're painting something really close in, you know, blazing sunlight or something like that. But you can see that the same two, bismuth and viridian, into these already established puddle of greens here, and I get a much grayer version of this because of it's sort of like yesterday's yeast, you know, to keep that to keep baking. This green, this brighter green, will be analogous to all of the others, the other greens that I already have in this painting, descended from the same colors. And that might even be, oops, I'm so sorry. I put this in just like this, and that might even be too green, but I'm going to keep going with it. Just using my little two here. But there isn't really a reason to use a smaller brush. It was just the one that I had in my hand. Let me pull out a, this is a flat 10. So load this brush up. And get this shape in. So I've got to say, time flies when you're having a good time, doesn't it? I feel like we all just got together 30 minutes ago, and I'm looking at the clock, and we've already been here almost 2 hours. I really appreciate your attention and your questions. Thank you. So this paint film is in, and they're actually, I like how that looks now that it's all in. You have a nice, you can see it on the screen. Look at the atmospheric perspective from here to here to there. It's so exciting because they're just big flats of shapes of color, right? Haven't done anything fancy at all yet. When we start getting into the texture and the edges, a little more on that tomorrow, there'll be so much more, but just getting these big shapes established, and it's already moving in the right direction. You can see me being true to my thumbnail. The design is established. And for me, coming up with this process for myself is just, I'm looking for the easiest way to do something that I think is, you know, painting can be difficult, and having a process to follow for me has just the number of paintings that fail versus the number of paintings that succeed has drastically swung since I started really 2 years ago, really trying to hammer down, this is how I start a painting. This is how I progress through a painting, because before it always felt like, especially in the studio, I just sort of did something different every single time. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So do you remember I said I want a little gap through there? I don't want this dark line to go all the way up and connect. I want to somehow get your eye into the piece. Sorry about that. I want to gap between this green here and that green there. I don't want to block your eye off by connecting that line. Sorry, I forgot to show you my screen there. Thank you for telling me. So now I just have one more. It is a nice dark along there, the richest greens, looking down close at the palette again, bismuth yellow, viridian green, and gold ochre, right? And I don't think we need red or anything like that to make this grayer, because it's so close to us. Those greens will be so fresh. You can see I'm just pulling up a little on my brush to get an indication of that brush, but then leaving that gap there. Okay, and that leaves today, the sky needs to be blocked in, and I've saved it for last because the sky is the one thing that I can't block in with the colors of the landscape. If you try to mix using these colors that are already on the palette, and you try to mix these fresh colors in the sky, what you're going to have is a dirty looking sky. So I do have to start my own separate pile on the palette for those greens. Let me get going on that. I'm just going to take my palette knife and just give myself a nice little section to work out the sky colors. And we have, remembering average color and accurate value, really have need for just two shapes here. The dark, sort of ominous looking cloud sweeping down over the horizon, and that brighter sky beneath it. So you can't really tell whether the storm is breaking or forming here. I'm going to get a little bit more titanium white that doesn't have a lot of other color mixed into it. Just try to keep these mixtures pretty clean, meaning I don't want to pull in the colors that I've been using for the landscape, or the mixtures that I've been using for the landscape. Start off with a bit of white here. Now, even though that cloud is dark, I'm going to actually share my screen with you and do this just to prove the point. So even though this cloud is dark, it's not nearly, can everyone see the screen? So it's not nearly as dark as anything in the landscape. So let me just do a desaturate right here and look at how bright that whole sky stays compared to the landscape. So a little bit harder to tell when it's color, but we have to make sure that that cloud stays dark. So, or that dark cloud doesn't get anywhere near as dark as the landscape. So I'm just going to mix a little of my bright red, the pyrrole red, a little bit of my bismuth yellow, that bright yellow, and a little bit of my ultramarine blue. These are the three primaries together mixed, and they give you a gray. And this is the part where, okay, but it's a green gray, right? That gray is definitely too green for the cloud, well, if something is too green, you just add a little red. And then that may make it a little bit too orangey looking, too red looking. Just add a little blue. And you keep playing with adding a little bit more of the primaries to this gray until it lands on the gray that you're looking for. So mixing the three primaries together is a great way to get a gray color. All right, let's see how that looks. And I think that's going to be, after my long speech about accurate value, I think that's too dark, right? So no problem, just add a little bit of white. You can see I have almost the whole painting blocked in now. And that means that it's much easier to spot errors like this right away. This is all tube consistency paint, no thinner, no medium. And there's quite a bit of paint on my brush, which means I'm not digging up or mixing into the colors of the tone very much. And also they've begun to set up because I put them on with so much mineral spirits. That mineral spirits is evaporating out all the time and giving you a firmer film of paint to paint over. Okay, so there's the cloud. And now that lighter piece of sky in there, used white plus gold ochre to get that nice warm color. In the beginning. And let that be the stand-in now. Not going to worry about the really interesting and gorgeous little shapes in there. When I'm doing the block-in, I'm painting with the largest shapes possible to represent the painting. So a few smaller shapes in the block-in are needed, yes, but try to leave most of them out toward until the end. Okay, so that, oops, pull a little bit of the tree into the sky. And then there's this, it's sort of a gradient and it gets into that gray as it goes back. So I'm just gonna use the same gray for the clouds up here and just brush that back here a little bit. It's an easy fix. And that'll keep your eye kind of circling a little bit better too. Okay, so that's the block-in. That's layer number one. That is accurate value and average color from corner to corner, edge to edge. This is the end of the first layer, and it's the end of the day one of the demo. One thing that is really, I'm gonna find my number 12, flat is perfect at the end to make sure there's no paint on the brush and you're using very little pressure. If you, and you can see it a little bit better. I'm gonna switch cameras for just a second. To see all that glare, that's because of all those fluid horizontal strokes, and a lot of them are picking up the light and shining a little too much. And so the way to get rid of those false highlights is just to ever so gently, vertically, either down or up, ever so gently stroke those so that they're not glaring anymore. Basically, you're just pulling all those, you can see it, a lot of it right in there. You're pulling all those harsh vertical strokes out. And especially in this first layer, it's important because paintings are lit from above. And when this painting goes to live on someone's wall, and there's a light coming from above and you have all sorts of glare on it, it can be a little bit hard to see what's happening in the painting. So it's important to just pull that glare out. And you can see I'm using so little pressure. I'm not blending it together. I'm not smearing it together. I'm not dragging it around. I'm just ever so slightly pulling out those glare strokes and getting a nice flat film of paint that I can paint over tomorrow that won't have all those glare, you can call them false highlights in your painting. So there is day one.